Again, I'm Matt Maris, and today's presentation is on canal stagecoaches, and really, I'm just kind of using Charles Dickens and following Charles Dickens, the journey of Charles Dickens in Pennsylvania in 1842. So, really interesting author, novelist, right? You've heard of Christmas Carol, and you've heard of Oliver Twist, and these wonderful works of literature. And popular guy when he came to America in 1842. I think he just finished Oliver Twist, and he was about to write A Christmas Carol the next year. But anyways, we'll talk about his journey, and hopefully you'll feel like we're going on a journey together with Charles Dickens. And really, the presentation is about Pennsylvania's transportation history. So with that kind of thrown in there. But again, my name's Matt. Like Caroline said, I'm a teacher, and I have a business called Local Historia, where I do walking tours. And my business partner and I, Dustin, we try to create fun, engaging events. We both write for Town and Gown, a regular column, which is mainly Center County and Central PA topics. We love doing this stuff. We're teachers. I'm a teacher. I love history, and I got into local history really deeply. And the more I do it, the more the deeper I get. And actually, in York, I was teaching, and one of my first teaching jobs was at Red Line High School. And I had a great experience. We lived in York, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this too, is gave me a reason to research in York and learn more about York and the area, which I loved and still do. So anyways, I volunteered for a while with the York County History Center back in the day when I was teaching, like, I don't know, 2015-ish, I don't know, somewhere in there, 14. And I was helping to give tours at the Golden Plow Tavern. And I loved it, so that was one of the first volunteer experiences I had. I was a full-time teacher, and I was getting into local history. And I really obviously love local history, and it's a great way to connect. What better way to connect with a community than through local history? And I started getting that love for that at York and at the History Center and at the Golden Plow Tavern. So anyways, just wanted to thank y'all for that. Here's a couple pictures of our tours. If you have questions about tours and stuff, you can ask later if you want. But again, we just like to create creative, engaging experiences where people can connect with history. The one picture on the left is in a beer vault, 19th century beer vault, where barrels of beer would have been stored and lagered in Center County on a private property location. And then we love to do tours and Civil War themed tours and all that. But anyways, enough about me. We're going to talk about this journey of Charles Dickens. And I apologize, I'm a little under the weather. I feel fine, but I sound a little scratchy and stuff, but I'm doing okay. So Charles Dickens took a journey to America in 1842. And real quick, I have to kind of just say his nickname is Boz. There's kind of a long story to that, I guess, but one of his earlier pen names was Boz, and it's kind of, I think it has to do with another nickname, Moses, and then they called him Boses, and then it shortened to Boz. There's a longer story to that, but his nickname is Boz. So in the newspapers that I'm researching, they're always talking about, Boz's new work, or they'll say Boz, here's another one, Boz, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Dickens. So that's referring to Mr. Dickens. And, he's a, English author coming over. He sails over on a steamship and then travels all over America. But we're just going to look at his time in Pennsylvania. And it's a really good snapshot of transportation history at the time, because he is using railroads, early railroads. He is using stagecoaches still. And I have a cool story about a local stagecoach coachman from York, and he's going to use the Pennsylvania Canal, which is a really fascinating chapter in American history that was short-lived and is, really unique. So anyways, this journey, there's Charles on the left. On the right is his book. It was called American Notes for General Circulation. And he published it pretty much right after he got back. I think in 1842, it was starting to come out. And then eventually by 1843 and stuff, it's out. So he came to America in January of 1842, and he left, I think, by June. So about 6 months. And he traveled everywhere. And you know what? His notes were very frank and very, very honest, and very, he's got that writing style where it's witty and creative and long-winded and all this, observation. He's a very observant guy. And but he didn't hold anything back. He talked about all kinds of interesting topics. So if it would be interesting to analyze it for, and people have, for his comments on slavery in the American South. He made a lot of comments about it. He talked, about people's, what he ate, and, whether the food was good or bad, or the way people looked, and, the way cities were, or towns. And so when he was done with his comments, and when Americans started to read it, a lot of them were unhappy. So this is from the Pittsburgh Daily Post, and it says, Bawes's new work, To the Great Horror of American People, be it spoken that Dickens is writing a work on this ill-fated country in which it is more than probable that he will cut us up into mincemeat and leave nothing of us to gratify the cruel appetites of future tourists. And he goes on, and he says, poor Uncle Sam will have to give up the ghost. So there was a lot of newspaper comments like this about his book's a waste of money, and, in Richmond and Baltimore and Boston and New York. Sometimes they were just kind of just neutral, but there was a lot of comments that were, anger, I guess. So he did not hold anything back. And he came to America with his wife, Catherine, and some other folks, her maid, and they traveled and did this grand tour. And this is a wonderful site that I recommend, that was really helpful. It's the charlesdickenspage.com. But this is a good overview of all the places that he's going in his journey in 1842. So he's going to write a book about his journey. He's very observant. He talks about every little step, which is, for us history buffs and, people who love history, and, it's a primary source. So, for anybody, that's important. And just this being a solid primary source of 1842, which is a time that's overlooked a lot, at least in my opinion. You're not talking about 1770s, or, you're not talking about the 1860s. You're talking about 1842, kind of like common things, transportation and taverns and things like that, daily life. We have transportation on our mind all the time, and we just see it as daily life, and we don't realize how important it is to our daily life. Anyways, so we're going to focus in on Pennsylvania. So let me grab so I have a little red mouse here. I don't know if that helps, but he did travel a lot before he got to Pennsylvania. He came from Washington to Baltimore, and then we're going to talk about his trip from Baltimore to York and so forth. From on his way to Baltimore, this is just a side note, he mentioned, he makes little comments. He was on a steamship going back to Baltimore after he did some sightseeing, and he's going to prisons, and he's going to the Congress, and he's going all over the place. And he mentioned 2 constables on the steamship looking for runaway slaves in Maryland. So there's a lot of commentary on, like I said, slavery or the Underground Railroad or things like that could be used in his work too. So we left Baltimore. Here our journey begins. We left Baltimore by another railway at 8:30 in the morning and reached the town of York, some 60 miles off. By the early dinner time of the hotel, which was the starting place of the four-horse coach, wherein we were to proceed to Harrisburg. So that's from his American notes. He's talking about the railroad journey from Baltimore to York. And then in the local papers, they mentioned that he left, him and Mr. and Mrs. Dickens, after spending 2 days in our city of monuments, seeing what was to be seen, left yesterday for Pittsburgh by the Susquehanna Railroad. During his stay, Mr. Dickens visited several of our public institutions and was everywhere received with the consideration due to the distinguished stranger and author. Also, Washington Irving was in the city during the time and left for New York yesterday. So he takes the Susquehanna Railroad. So it's the Baltimore and Susquehanna Railroad. So if your railroad fans are watching this, I'll hopefully get this right for you, but I think we got it figured out. He took an early railroad from Baltimore, and this is a map from 1840. And you have the orange here, that's finished railroads. And he's, that's the Baltimore and Susquehanna Railroad. So 1828 or something like that is when they started to charter it. 1830s, it starts to grow from Baltimore, but they're not allowed to go into Pennsylvania yet. So they had just finished this railroad when he arrived, like a few years before this. So that I think by 1838, there was the York to Maryland line railroad coming from York, and there was the Baltimore to Susquehanna Railroad coming from Baltimore, and they connected by 1838, 1839, and now he's taking that railroad from Baltimore to York for about an hour, what do you say, 60 miles, takes a few hours, and that's the railroad. So that's pretty cool. So I mentioned that, but here's some reminders for me. Those are the two railroads that initiated, and we're talking early transportation. Like the Baltimore and Susquehanna Railroad at first was using horse-drawn cars. Okay, so they're pulling, and this was common in the 1820s and 30s, where there were railroads, you're pulling them with horses, and they're not quite using the steam engines yet, right? Until the 1830s, you start to see that in, Philadelphia, Baltimore, different places around the country with the adoption of the steam engine. So that railroad's going to connect by the time he takes that journey. And then just kind of the future of that railroad, it does become the Northern Central Railway. They merge several railroads together. And that's a pretty famous railroad, obviously, and it's become a lot of the rail trails that are in York and other places. We used to use that rail trail all the time, going toward like Glen Rock and stuff like that. Very famous railroad. I have a little picture of Lincoln's funeral car in the bottom right, and it's just from the Library of Congress. When he did his funeral train, tour with his son, they stopped in all kinds of places, and they didn't stop in York, but they traveled the Northern Central Railway up from York to Harrisburg. So it would have went through York. So it's just really neat. And then when he did the Gettysburg Address, he didn't come through York, but he took the Northern Central Railroad to the Hanover Junction, and then took basically a left to Gettysburg. So it's a really important railroad, very historic railroad, as most of them are. And then the Pennsylvania Railroad is going to adopt it and take it over and lease it to them by the 1900s. All right. So we're at the National House, or initially Whitehall Hotel. And it's said to have been built in 1828 and by the proprietor around then. And, this is a great photo. It's a postcard, probably turn of the century. You got National in there. You got, it kind of has a Cheers vibe. It feels like, the show Cheers. You got people standing out there, looking nice. And you got the stagecoach, couple horses. The stagecoach we're going to talk about had 4 horses. It was a lot bigger. This is kind of like a normal carriage there. And so he's going to end up visiting and kind of staying at the Whitehall, okay, hotel at the time. So the Durkees, they were the proprietors. And I'll come back to the picture here in a second, but so there's some local history on his visit. And then there's the history that's in, Dickens's notes. So they're okay, which makes sense. I mean, Dickens is not going to, he's just traveling all over the place. He's not going to make every little detail. He only says, I think, did I put it up here? This is all he says about York. Okay. As far as staying in York, and he had dinner, and there is he alludes to this hotel. It would have been nice if he said Whitehall Hotel or something like that. But he doesn't say that. He just says it's another hotel. He's going to stay in a hotel in Harrisburg the next night. Okay. And he just stayed in Baltimore at the he did mention that one because he said it was the nicest one, the Burnham Hotel. So, but I don't think he stays in York. Okay. I think that's kind of like assumed, but I don't think he stays over because he gets here Thursday afternoon. He leaves at, remember our quote a minute ago, he leaves at 8:30 a.m. and he gets here a few hours later. So it's 11:30, 12 o'clock. And he's going to take a stagecoach to Harrisburg. So he probably's, I don't know exactly when he leaves for Harrisburg, but he does eat. And maybe they do let him, this is just complete, assumption, but maybe they do let him rest in a room or something like that. But I'm pretty, sure he doesn't stay overnight because he's going to be in Harrisburg by Friday morning. And he's going to travel Thursday, most of the day on a stagecoach. So he's going to eat there, and he called it early dinner. And then he's going to, so around noon, I don't know if he gets 12:30, whatever. And then he's going to maybe rest a few minutes and then eat and then go. Okay. And there's a picture on the right is just modern day, National House there. Holy Hound tap room. I've enjoyed some trivia days over there. And yeah, it's just neat to compare the photo. They have it looking pretty good with those railings and everything. Obviously some differences and everything, but looks really nice. Okay, so stagecoach like that, but bigger is where we're going next. But like I said, with the local comments, there's a historian you're probably familiar with in York, George Prowell, and he wrote a pretty serious history by 1906 on the history of York, and then he was still writing in the newspapers later in his life. So in 1923, a few years before he passed, he wrote about Dickens' visit again, and he's the one, as far as I can tell, who is relaying the oral history of what happened. So he made the comments that Dickens said when he arrived at Whitehall, that's a familiar name. So like he's used to a place like that in London or in England somewhere. And I trust we shall have a good dinner after our long ride of 3 hours from Baltimore here. And then he says he overhears, or one of the proprietor's relatives, the Durkees, they overhear him before he leaves. He says, Mr. Dickens thanked the proprietor of Whitehall for an excellent accommodations and remarked to Judge Durkee that he had for dinner the best beef he ever ate in America. There it is. He had the best beef he ever ate in America. So that was from historian George Prowell. That's not in his notes. And there are some letters. So there's a lot of Charles Dickens resources out there. And there are letters that he wrote that he kind of elaborates on some of this stuff. But I'm pretty sure in those letters, as far as I can find, he doesn't mention the beef statement either. That's just a local oral history passed down. And it could be exactly true. I'm sure the people, he was a celebrity. He came in, and it was reported in all the newspapers across the United States about his arrival, in Boston, and just a celebrity. So people were going out of their way, and it makes this stagecoach driver I'm about to tell you about a celebrity too, because he's the guy who drove Charles Dickens to Harrisburg on his huge stagecoach. And that's him. So before I talk about Mr. Stubbins, Charles Dickens says, "For as soon as we had dined, he did eat at the Whitehall, the National House. There came rumbling up the street, shaking its sides like a corpulent giant, a kind of barge on wheels." So Dr. Samuel Stubbins is a stagecoach driver, and he ends up becoming a doctor of veterinary science, I guess. He becomes a vet. He knows his horses, and he is called, known as Dr. Samuel Stubbins. So he is and the whole company, Charles's wife and other people, and just random strangers who are going to go with him. I wonder if they had any comments on Dickens somewhere, possibly. And they're going to go from from York to Harrisburg. So he talks about that. He is interviewed by the York Dispatch and other newspapers. And so I have a couple of his comments here, and you just have to excuse the long quotes, but this is from Dr. Samuel Stubbins. And this is in 1891. I think, I forget when he passes away, but it's like 1890 something, 97, 95. And, they talk to him. He's interviewed a lot. He's seen as a local character, kind of a celebrity for taking Charles Dickens on that ride. And he's a storyteller, and he has lots of these cool anecdotes about just being a stagecoach driver. Is a very dangerous occupation. He told stories about people getting robbed and murdered, drivers between York and Philadelphia. So he's got lots of stories. So here's one of them. So I got out my big coach, he says. It was heavy. It was a heavy lumbering affair. As Dickens said, a thorough-braced tally-ho, which 9 could comfortably be stowed away, while 5, could be seated outside with the driver. It was a regular old double-decker, and I remember well that we had a full load that day. Dickens stopped at the McGrath House on Center Square, which was kept by a jolly good-natured Irishman. Stage headquarters were at the Washington House, but we always pulled up on departing at the Whitehall, which was located where the National now is. I had 4 big gray horses hitched to the coach. It was a warm, pleasant afternoon when we started, with Dickens on the same seat with me. So he was on the same seat with him. He picked him up at Whitehall. It's going to rain eventually, but that's commentary from the stagecoach driver. So he's kind of filling in some details for us. Then he says, we always made 3 stops between York and Harrisburg. 3 stops: Liverpool, which is now called Manchester; Henrietter's Tavern, which was a halfway house and near the present town of Goldsboro; and New Cumberland. At each stop, nearly all the passengers invariably got off to get something to moisten their parched throats. If it were summer, to warm up the cockles of their hearts; if it was winter. During this particular journey, Dickens alighted at each halt. Stretching his limbs, he would take a sweeping survey of his surroundings, jot something down in a notebook, and then enter the tavern, saying, as most other travelers in those days did, "Come, driver, take something." So he would, I like how he mentioned he jotted in his notebook and took in his surroundings. He certainly was observant and taking it all in. So the newspaper reporter asked the doctor, "Do you think Mr. Dickens was served with his favorite mint julep during this trip?" And Stubbins says, "I can't recollect just exactly about that, but I think it was a whiskey straight he swallowed, and good whiskey it was them days. And don't you forget it. It tickled Dickens when I would blow the big horn we always carried, and which would bring almost the entire town out to see the arrival of the stage. I was stout and long-winded in those days, and I could blow a blast that would, I think, allow Gabriel himself to find no fault with." So you can see he's a lively, interesting man, and he's got a lot of stories to tell, and that's just a couple little anecdotes about. And he had more to say, but that's just a couple of things I'll share with you. So the journey from York to Harrisburg, we got from Baltimore to York. Now he's getting picked up by this barge on wheels by this character. Let me go back to this picture. It's not a great picture. I apologize, but it's the best I can get at the moment. Um, and it's he what's he holding there? He's got I guess he's got a revolver and a knife. And it comes from those stories of him talking about stagecoach drivers getting robbed, right? So, I guess he's trying to, be tough out in that photo. But, Charles Dickens didn't even have nice things to say about him. The only thing he mentions about Stubbins is kind of complaints. Not that it was like serious complaints, but it was just like, oh, he didn't help people with the coach. He didn't care what was going on in the coach. And maybe that's how a stagecoach driver is. You guys figured out. You're the people in the coach. If there's not enough room, get out. So he complained about him just not caring going on in the coach. And then he described his appearance. He said he looked like a shaggy English baker or something like that. So he had the appearance of a kind of a unkept, I forget the word he used, English baker. So I don't know what that means, but he didn't have a lot of positive things to say, but Mr. Stubbins has lots of positive things to say about Dickens and that experience. So we're going from York to Harrisburg. He said they're going to stop in Liverpool, which is now Manchester. We're getting to Northern York area, York Haven Hotel. Now, Dickens does not mention York Haven Hotel. That is kind of another local oral history that he did stop in York Haven. And then Stubbins mentions Henry Edders. So Stubbins didn't mention York Haven Hotel, but other people have reported that. Henry Edders is at Goldsboro, and that's where they're going to change horses, and that's where there's going to be a sauerkraut dinner for Charles Dickens. So that's a neat little stop. They're stopping, they're eating, they're getting a drink, they're stretching their legs, and they're going to keep going. It's a long journey. A couple comments from Dickens. So he says, this is kind of like an interesting part of the journey. They are meeting some people. They're meeting some interesting people. Probably in Liverpool is when Dickens mentions a kind of a drunk coming out of a tavern and climbing on to the stagecoach, and then shortly after falling off. And he thought, man, he must have broke his neck. And he stumbles. They say he stumbles back to the groggery he came from in Liverpool, but he seemed to be okay. So there was this tipsy man incident. And then at the Edders Tavern, he's going to go in, get a sauerkraut, Pennsylvania Dutch, dinner. And he's going to say, he's going to make the comment, he swallowed the usual anti-temperance recipe for keeping out the cold. So interesting. And that may have been what Stubbins was commenting on, of what did he drink? And people were curious, and he thinks he just had what he said. As they're journeying toward Harrisburg, Dickens does say some nice things about the scenery. He says, the scenery, which had been tame enough at first, was for the last 10 or 12 miles beautiful. Our road wound through the pleasant valley of the Susquehanna. The river, dotted with innumerable green islands, lay upon our right. And then they're going to eventually stop at New Cumberland and make their way to Harrisburg. Charles Dickens does say, I'm going to show you a quick map here. This is from 1860, county map of York. So they're basically coming out of York. They call this like the Harrisburg Road, and they're going to come this way, and they're going to head. I'm going to jump back. They're going to head over past Emmetsville, and they're going to hit Liverpool, which is now, Manchester. And then they're going to keep going past Mount Wolfe and all that, and they're going to head over to York Haven. So, it makes sense if they stop at a hotel there again. It's a good distance, need a break. He said to wet their parched throats or whatever. And then they're along the Susquehanna here, and he's going to get to Goldsboro. Okay. And there, it does say Edders Post Office, but by this time Henry Edders has passed away, and it's not the Edders Tavern anymore, but he did have the post office. He was the post office when he was the tavern. So maybe that's an old reference, or it's another Edders or whatever. And he was also like a justice of the peace and things like that. So he was very active in that town. So this is where they're going to change horses. And Dickens does say, you know, that this big, you got this big stagecoach, it's got 10 people in the coach, got people on top. They're going to change the horses, the 4 horses. And he does say the driver changes too. So I don't know why Stubbins never clarified. He almost sounds like he went all the way to Harrisburg, which it could have been. But the one thing specific that Charles Dickens says at Goldsboro is that when they changed horses, they also changed drivers or changed coach. And that's when he said the first one looked like a baker, an English unkept baker, and the second one he described looked like something else. That's not very flattering, so I'm not going to talk about it. So he does change drivers. So I don't know if Stubbins is done at this point, or if that's maybe something he was thinking of at a different place or whatever. But they're going to keep going. They do, when he does change drivers, he talks about the driver brought like a kid with him, must have been his son or a relative. And Dickens turns around, he's on the, kind of like the buckboard out front, and he looks back, and there's in the luggage is this kid kind of hanging on top of the roof rack, just kind of being told to be quiet by his, by the driver. So it's a interesting experience with this stagecoach. There was another guy at one point who joined at the beginning, and there was no room, and people were like, "There's no room," and he's like, "I gotta go." And so he's like, I will be on the stagecoach. So somebody got out of the coach and climbed up there with Charles Dickens and the driver, which was Stubbins, and so they all sitting together real tight. All right, so they're gonna keep going, and as you can imagine, they're gonna so the railroad's not finished when Dickens is on this trip, and neither is the canal at this part in this part of Pennsylvania. So that they're taking a stagecoach, old school, right? And New Cumberland's the other stop. They're going to get a rest there, and then they're going to end up crossing a bridge, which he describes as very long, and he said it's almost a mile long, and very, Susquehanna is wide. If I'm not mistaken, the Native American language, I think, translates to something like wide river, something like that. And that he describes this wooden bridge they take the stagecoach through, and then they pop out in Harrisburg streets. All right, and he's gonna stay in Harrisburg, and then that's Thursday night. So that's why I said I don't think that. Excuse me. He stayed in York, or he didn't stay in York, according to the timeline. But he was there for a while, and pretty cool. So he traveled to Harrisburg now. Now we're in Harrisburg. And he does visit a prison in Harrisburg. He looks at probably the state legislature, I think, on different things. Kind of doing a tour in the Friday morning, and then Friday afternoon, he's going to get on the canal, main line of the canal. And this is where I think a lot of people are interested in the canal system. So I haven't even talked about the canal yet. But he's going to get on the canal, above Harrisburg here, and then take it all the way to Pittsburgh. So we'll talk about that now. Haven't really been looking for chat questions or anything, but I guess, Caroline, if you need me, just pop in. So we're going to take the canal now, and this map's great from 1840. You can see in blue some of the finished canals. And, he's going to take that over into along the Juniata River, the Juniata Division. and head, past Huntington to Hollidaysburg. And then we'll talk about the Allegheny Portage Railroad over here. So he's getting on a boat and then he's getting on a railroad, back and forth. And this is fast at the time, though. This is very fast. He was just in Baltimore on Thursday, and now he's going to be, I think, in Pittsburgh by Monday. So it's pretty fast for that time period. This is revolutionary. We're talking a passenger. He's taking stagecoaches, and he's going to take a packet line boat with passengers. But the importance of freight is so important, right? You can transport iron and grain and coal and whatever you need by boat, tons and tons and tons and tons. So it's very, very effective in many ways. But when the railroads catch up, it's gonna end the canal days pretty quickly, inevitably. So you've probably seen, or if you may have seen this image before from the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission. It's in a lot of canal publications about Pennsylvania, and it's kind of fun. It's got neat look to it, and some of the highlights, some of the features. Like I said, I'm in Bellefonte. I'll mention some canal stuff connected to Bellefonte here, or later toward the end. But this is, I'm up here in the West Branch, but where he's at down here with Harrisburg, and they don't actually label Harrisburg, but he's going to take that from Harrisburg on the main line to Pittsburgh. So we're going to talk about that journey. And then I'll mention some of the lower Susquehanna stuff if we have time as well. All right. So this is when, things are complete. They were not all in existence at the same time, but this is like all the canals were there. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds of miles, hundreds. Maybe I think, I'm not exactly sure if it's the most in the nation, but it's got to be up there. I wouldn't say it is, and I'm not 100%, but it's a lot of canal mileage. Okay. And a lot of it's built by immigrants, Irish labor and different things like that. So it's a huge public project, and Pennsylvania goes through canal fever and almost bankrupts the state. But it's, becomes very valuable for a short period of time. Okay. So when he leaves Harrisburg on the canal boat, which first his comments on the canal boat at first were funny because he's like, it's a little floating barge, a little floating house. He's like, how are we all going to get on that? He's with his entourage. How are we going to get in that little boat? And where are we going to sleep? So his first questions, everybody was wondering about the domesticity of it all. And he is kind of scared or curious, or it's awkward. And he realizes that, they're going to be packed in there and they're going to sleep, and they're going to draw a red curtain between the men and women, but you can still hear the women, and the women can still hear the men on the other side of the red curtain, giggling and stuff, or talking, when they're getting ready for bed. So it's just this really new experience for probably everybody if you've never been on a canal boat. So pretty cool. This is an important part, is as they travel from Harrisburg, remember they're across the river because they took the stagecoach across, and they're going to take it back over on this long bridge. So the night was cloudy yet, but moonlight too. And when we cross the Susquehanna River, over which there is an extraordinary wooden bridge with two galleries, one above the other, so that even there, two boat teams meeting may pass without confusion. It was wild and grand. So this is Clark's Ferry Bridge. It's was part of the Pennsylvania Canal main line. It had two galleries meeting. You can take boats two different ways. And it becomes one of the longest bridges in the country. I don't know at what point that changed, but major project, wooden bridge, just amazing. And this picture's later, it's in the 1880s. But yeah, he's gonna cross this bridge over the Susquehanna again with a canal boat, and then he's gonna be following the Juniata toward toward Pittsburgh. So a wonderful picture, one of the bridge that ends up becoming a concrete bridge and different things. But when it was with the canal, when it was an aqueduct, right? It's a bridge that is full of water that's used to transport the boats over a river. So believe it or not, there's water on the bridge. It's a water bridge. So when I tell my students that, they're just like, what? So the engineering of that is amazing. And this is in it was built in the 1830s initially. They had to rebuild it because it had some problems. It was blown over by wind at one point in the 1850s, I think. So it had a lot of rebuilds, but he used this bridge to cross the Susquehanna River. All right, so we're getting there. We're making some progress. I got through a lot of the early stuff. The Allegheny Portage Railroad is going to be his next major, observation, and he talks about that. I'm not going to maybe read this whole thing to you, but he just talks about what it looked like, and he's you're interested in this topic, and I'm not really digging in enough to read his American notes because he does describe what it's like to be, looking over the incline planes at, the surrounding farmlands and stuff like that. But he's, it says there's 10 incline planes, 5 ascending, 5 descending. Some are pulled by stationary steam engines, some are pulled by horses, and it's a marvel. It's, they're taking boats out of the river and pulling them over the mountain, the Allegheny front there, because that's all you can do. Okay, you can't blast a hole or tunnel through that mountain at that time. It's just too big, and y'all know that this isn't going to last, especially with railroads coming, and they're going to make an important engineering feat on the same Allegheny ridges in the 1850s. And by 1854, near Altoona or in Altoona, they're gonna make the horseshoe curve, right? So many of you know that's coming. The horseshoe curve is going to put this Allegheny Portage Railroad kind of out of business, inevitably, and railroads are now linked, and that's inevitably going to put the canal out of business eventually. So important part. He gets to Pittsburgh. He talks about the furnaces are burning, and he hears the clanking of hammers. This is after a couple nights of rest. I think they left on the canal Friday, and now he's coming into Pittsburgh on Monday evening. So, and that's fast. Back in the day, it would have took 4 to 6 weeks to get across the state of Pennsylvania. Now we're talking 4 or 5 days. He's stopping a lot. He's going from Harrisburg to Pittsburgh, but it's also pretty convenient to get to Philly from Harrisburg as well. So it takes him less than 4 days to get to Pittsburgh. He mentions another aqueduct, which I'd like to learn more about, which was stranger than the bridge at Harrisburg, being a vast low wooden chamber full of water. We emerged upon the ugly confusion of backs of buildings and crazy galleries and stairs, which always abuts on water, whether it be river, sea, canal, ditch, and we were at Pittsburgh. So they're at Pittsburgh for a little while, and then they're going to get on a steamboat. So there's more steam. Okay. So there's steam all along the journey. Okay. That's a big part of this time period, right? And he's going to get on the Messenger. Okay. And it's not funny, but they talk. I mean, steamboats are blowing up. This is early. They're just, the steam engine itself was, been around since the late 1700s, but being adapted to locomotives and boats is relatively newish. And he's talking to his friends and stuff about, they typically blow up at the front, and when they were picking their steamboat, they literally looked at the fleet and they asked about which ones have a good reputation for running well. And they said the Messenger. So he chose the Messenger. So he's going to take it from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati, and they're going to do it safely. They're going to make it. But it's kind of interesting. Oh yeah, here's this quote. We had been a great many times very gravely recommended to keep as far aft as possible because steamboats generally blew up forward. So, he's like, it's hey, worth the risk. I'm gonna travel America, and I'm gonna travel by steam. And unfortunately, the steamboat does if does have a bad ending. In 1859, it must have been being used not just solely between Pittsburgh and Cincinnati anymore, because it was being used between Memphis and New Orleans. As far as I can tell, it did have a fire, and it did have a problem, but the passengers and freight were saved. But kind of ironically, the Messenger did catch fire at some point later. All right, reminding you of his journey, it's not over. We just went through Pennsylvania, okay? And he's going to keep going to Louisville and all kinds of places. They're going to go up into Canada, all kinds of cool stuff. And, probably in much of the same way he went through Pennsylvania with railroad, stagecoach, and steamboats. All right. So that kind of is his journey in a nutshell. And I focused a little bit on York. But, if you have questions, let me know. But I wanted to mention just a few minutes of other canal stuff. And these are some remnants that are near me. And it's just, it's fun to explore this stuff and find stuff. And I'll recommend some resources where you could find parks where there's restored canals, canal locks. This is a picture near Bellefonte at an old ironworks, and down in a little kind of like ravine where the canal was is a canal lock, and this is we believe lock 4 of the Bald Eagle and Spring Creek navigation, which was one of the last canals to link up with the system. We here at Bellefonte didn't get it till 1848. So, it took some time, but we finally were the terminus of the West Branch. And so it connected us to Lock Haven. So in that picture to the bottom right, this is the canal right here. To the left is Spring Creek, and to the right, you can almost see a little canal lock, possibly. That's pretty much where this one is. So that's kind of neat. And, it's just some ruins, unfortunately. Maybe the people who own the property might, or whoever owns the property at some point could, they're aware about it, I'm sure, but maybe perhaps some kind of restoration, but it depends on their goals for it and stuff. But this one's also nearby. And this one is closer to Lock Haven. It's in Mount Eagle, which is kind of between Howard and Milesburg. So this is one I just kind of visited recently, and was thinking kind of generally where it was, and kind of lucked out, and it was fun. It was fun coming across it. It's fun exploring. It's fun hunting for history, right? And, you can see the rounded lock there when it's, that's a kind of a good sign that it's a lock. And then the other side is kind of falling apart, but you can see that canal channel, it's like 15 feet wide, kind of ish, typical. So pretty cool. This is the kind of how I was, this map helped me find it. I'll zoom actually to the actual map real quick. A little bit better images. But this is the Bald Eagle and Spring Creek navigation projected in 1835. So it wasn't finished yet, but eventually this is pretty much where the locks end up. And the one I just showed you was it's probably this lock 14 here. So here's my little arrow again, lock 14. So it's probably right there. And then the other one, the first one I showed you where that ironworks was, is over here closer to Bellefonte, number 4. And it does say, it's kind of hard to see, but it does say Ironworks right here. And then there's a number 4. So yeah, there was, I don't know, 20 or 30 locks somewhere in there between Bellefonte and Lock Haven. So pretty cool. Couple that are still around. Now this one here is near Sayers Dam, so it's kind of in a flood area. So I don't know how much restoration or how, I'm not an engineer or anything. So I love to see these things get restored, but I don't know if that's in the cards for something that's it's probably on state property, kind of where flooding happens because the dam. Lock Haven obviously is named after the locks, the canals, and also the rafting that happened there with logging. And it's in the West Branch division of the canal system, and that's what eventually ties into Bellefonte. So, it just blows my mind that you could actually get on a boat or send something on a boat from the central PA all the way to, Harrisburg or Philly or wherever you were going to send it at one point with the canal. All right. So real quick back to York. This is a wonderful view of York from, is what it was called. And that's probably the road that Dickens and Mr. Dr. Samuel Stubbins came rolling with that big old stagecoach barge on wheels, this way toward Harrisburg. This, the Codorus Creek. Look here, you can see some canal boats. Wonderful picture. And 1852, so the canal is definitely there. And this would be the Susquehanna. Oh, actually, this would be the Codorus navigation that's going to connect to the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal system. So once that's completed, now you do have a canal system that can go all the way up to Harrisburg if needed, or can ship goods and freight to all the way to Maryland. So it's pretty obviously important canal system there as well. And so it's a wonderful picture. You can see the mules. These are probably some freight, some heavy stuff. You got multiple mules. And I didn't really mention how canals work, but they are towed. There's tow paths along canals because they are towed by animals. Okay. So they're not using steam on these small little canals and things like that. They're just towed by mules or horses. And Dickens' packet, he does say horses. So he's probably using some horses for his, but he might have just, maybe he didn't know what a mule was. I don't know. I'm sure he did. So we're almost done here. I know I'm getting close, but I did want to mention, there's some great resources for learning about canals. I was inspired by this book many years ago by William Shank, and he was a native of York. And he, was a tremendous name and asset to the canal community and education. So, I would recommend this book. I'd recommend anything written by him. He helped with forming the American Canal Society. And so I'll use that link right now real quick. But William Shank, amazing Pennsylvania canals, definitely recommend it. And that's where I learned a lot of this stuff. And it's a great place to learn. Okay. But back to the American Canal Society real quick, which he helped develop, and he wrote like a newsletter for. And I mentioned he lived in York, and I think he published his books and works from York. So he was another guy fascinated by the Pennsylvania canals. But this is a cool little resource. You can find canal parks or canal remnants, and it'll give you the exact locations. So, for example, Lock 12 with the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal system is down here, and this is the location. So if you use this resource, it can give you some directions how to get there, but it was PPL Electric helped develop a little park, and there's actually 2 locks down there and some other historic sites to check out. So that's pretty neat. So there's lock 13 or 15, sorry, and lock 12. So that's right near York. If you're in York, I know a lot of people watching this are not necessarily in York. But that's what I love to do, is talk local history and connect stuff. And then when I was looking at up here, is, let me see here, sorry. Almost done. Back out. We go back to Bellefonte here. Anybody watching from Bellefonte or Center County State College, Penns Valley? So here's actually the one, that's my location, it's my house. So if you want to visit my house, but this is lock 4 and 5 of the Bald Eagle Spring Creek. That's what I was mentioning. And there's the location of it. So that was helpful in finding that. I didn't have to look at the old map. I could have went here. Someone already found it for many years ago. So I'm not claiming to discover anything new, but it is fun to find it for yourself and to hunt down these things and to learn history yourself and to learn from these people who've come before, like William Shank and all these other canal experts and historians and all kinds of people. So it's just fun. I think I was pretty much done with my PowerPoint. Let me check here. That's just a picture in Columbia, 1870, with some canal boats. And then recommended sources. The one Charles Dickens page was really helpful. The American Canal Society, really helpful. And then I just put my website, shameless plug, just in case you want more information about our tours and things like that, or if you just have a question or want to reach out or whatever. So that's me, localhistoria.com. And yeah, I have a couple minutes for questions if anybody has them. I'll be happy to just talk for a few minutes.
So we do have a few questions that have come into the chat. The first, or actually 2 of them so far, tie back to when you were talking about the bridges. This first one is from Jack. He says, super interesting. I'm sure it was frustrating from a transportation perspective to have such a large river running through the middle of the state, like the Susquehanna, but yet too shallow to fully utilize it. Do you think the need to compete with other states led to so much canal development?
That's a great question. I do think it sparked it. The Erie Canal, was completed pretty early. And I think that's directly was a catalyst for Pennsylvania canals. So yeah, I think there was a little bit of competition, but also people just saw the value in it, like being able to put tons and tons of iron on a boat. Overland travel was just so difficult and took so long, and you could only, you're using Conestoga wagons and things like that. So obviously there's a benefit, but yeah, to that kind of project, I think there was a little bit of competitiveness, especially after the Erie Canal was finished.
Okay, we have another question, and it says, sounds like the bridge at Harrisburg was much like the one between Columbia and Wrightsville. Is that true?
Yeah, as far as I know, yeah, there's a neat picture of that one too in Shank's book, and it looked very similar, and was wooden. So that's a very historic bridge as well. So yeah.
And tying back to the mention of Dickens, do you or did you come across any standout experience that Dickens might have had during his journey to America?
That's a good question. I don't know. I didn't think about that one. I think I kind of focused in on the Pennsylvania area, but I think he did have, he went to the U.S. Congress, and he did talk nicely about some of the historic things in Baltimore, like I think they went to the harbor and stuff like that. So it's very he has a way of wording things that's interesting, but he's not very specific. Like he's like generally he made this comment about, I thought, like I said, the slavery kind of comments were something I wanted to dig more into. But yeah.
Wonderful. I think that those are most of the questions that we've gotten. If anybody has anything, oh, looks like we just got another one. Do you happen to know what feeder stream was used to fill the aqueduct across the Susquehanna at Clark's Ferry?
I'm actually not sure. I do know they dammed. They had a, I forget what the name of the dam was, but they dammed that area up to use that water, and that water would be also used for other parts of the canal. But I don't know exactly how they filled the bridge. Like, that's a great question. Engineering wise, I'm sure Mr. Shank could have answered that. But I'm not an engineer, but I would love to see some kind of model of that or figure that out. Maybe you could comment more, but I'm not exactly sure how they filled that thing up.
And it looks like we have two other questions that have come in so far that we'll end with. The first one is, he was not there long after the War of 1812. Do you think this colored his opinion of the U.S.?
I think it could have. That's a good question. I think he was just brutally honest. I don't know if he just knew he was a superstar and could say what he wanted. Yeah, I think, yeah, there was some bad blood between Englishmen and Americans after that. That's a good point. Maybe that was in his subconscious.
And then fellow teacher asking, would it be possible to get access to your PowerPoint or connect with you?
Yeah, of course, both. That'd be fine. Yeah, for sure. I can put my email, my specific email I can put in the chat right now. And then you can email me and I can email you this PowerPoint. And we can talk further. So that'd be totally good. Here's my email. I think I typed it in right. Doing two things at one time here.
Yeah, I'll make sure that gets to them. Looking good. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Great presentation here from Matt. Thank you again for coming to share this wealth of knowledge with us.
My pleasure. Thanks, Caroline. It was fun, and I enjoyed all the research as well. So thank you.
Yes, and have a great evening, everyone. And we hope to see you at one of our other History Center events, be that virtual or in person, and have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you all.